Hi guys, my name is Elsie. Welcome back to the Reinventing After 40 channel. That is for my returning subscribers. But if this is your first time, welcome. The aim of this channel is for me to walk with you through your reinventing process, whether in one area of your life or your life as a whole. So if this resonates with you, please subscribe. And to my returning subscribers and to you new ones, please like this video. Like this video. That's so important. Please like this video. Please turn on your post notifications so every time a new video drops, you are in the know. T for thanks. So today, without further ado, let's go into the topic of today: break the bias. As we all know, the International Women's Day of 2022 was themed Break the Bias. A theme so powerful, so meaningful. I love it. I love it. It's a movement. The Break the Bias movement is a movement that we all must be engaged with, male or female. And as much as we know that the International Women's Day was speaking against gender bias, which is speaking for a gender-free world, a world where it's free of stereotypes and discriminations against women, which is all good, is laudable. I would like to make you understand that there's so many other biases that we must break. But before we go into that, let's first get to understand what a bias is. What's the definition of a bias? Because it's a word that we know and some people are not very clear on what it means. So we'll define it. A bias is an inclination or a prejudice against or for a thing, a person, a group of people, an idea, a belief that in most times is considered to be unfair. So that says that a bias can sometimes be actually positive, but most of the time biases are negatives, right? So we all know what a bias is. Now let's look into the different types of biases. There are two umbrella types of biases. There's the conscious bias and there's the unconscious bias. So one will wonder, there are many types of biases. As we mentioned, the gender bias, which was what the International Women's Day stood for or were standing up for. There's the race bias, there are cultural biases, there are religious biases, there's sexual orientation biases, there are educational background biases. When I was doing my research into this topic, I realized that there are well over 100 biases. There are lots. They're just a lot. So it just goes to show, right? This is why we have to stand up against these things. But I would like us to understand that all these biases that we're talking about or that we know of, they fall into two umbrella types. With the conscious bias, anyone who is displaying the acts of a conscious bias they're aware of what they are doing. It is happening from a place of consciousness, a place of awareness. And majority of the time, conscious biases are with malicious intent, because this is you knowing what you want to do and hoping that it has an adverse effect on the person that you are biased towards, right? So that's a conscious bias. Then there's the unconscious bias, also called the implicit bias. It is a bias that the person who is perpetuating it is unaware of the fact that they are doing these things. A lot of times, unconscious biases are even in conflict with what your beliefs or your value systems are, because you do not know that you are doing these things. Hence, identifying unconscious biases remain increasingly difficult. To identify what you do not know, you cannot relate that it's not a walk in the park to identify something that you are not even aware of. The good thing about unconscious biases, if there's anything good about a bias, is that they are usually without malicious intent. So because they're done from a place of unconsciousness, and a lot of times even against what, as I said, against the grains of what you believe or what your values are, they're done from the subconscious. So they're usually without malicious intent. Does not mean that they do not create havoc or do damage to the recipients of these biases. So they must be addressed. They must be talked about. But first things first, let's understand why it's so important to address these things. In the day and age that we live in, equality, diversity, and inclusion are no longer nice to have. They are necessities. And the one thing that contends or fights against our moving forward or our progress in these areas are biases, especially unconscious biases. So we must be deliberate, to stand up for it, speak up against it, make efforts to fight these biases, and therefore, as we said, break the bias. Now, to begin to scratch the surface where we are breaking these biases, everyone, and I say everyone, must be taught about these two biases, more so or especially the unconscious bias. And to be honest, this is a topic that is interesting, because if you ask all of us, majority of us, hand to chest, we will tell you that we are without biases. Well, no, I don't have any bias. I'm afraid to be the one to break it to you. That's not true. We all have biases. Biases are unique human attributes to all of us. And you would wonder, what does that mean? What a bias is a bias or an unconscious bias is your brain telling you that you are different from this person, and therefore maybe because you are different in a certain type of way from this person is an enemy. You do not realize that that's how you feel about it, but it's a wiring, so that's why it's unconscious. It's an unconscious programming. We need to first understand that whilst bias can be learned, right, they are innate biases, and it's this innate biases that we're talking about. And biases can develop at any time in our lives, at any age. So whilst there are more learned biases, the innate ones are the ones that I think pose the most problems, because, you know, people go about doing it unknowingly. I mean, we can curb the conscious biases. We can address the person even doing the conscious bias knows it's deliberate, so, you know, it's malicious. That's a no-no. But the seemingly harmless actions of one person that is hurting another person must be addressed. It's critical that we get a hold of these things and we, you know, stare it eyeball to eyeball. We stare it down, we look it in the face, and we say, you know, this must stop. It is important to realize that biases are formed at a tender age. They are formed from the tendency of us embracing people who are more like us and surrounding ourselves with people who are more like us, and unconsciously labeling the people who are not like us as different. And you never know what the brain is going to wire, or how the brain is going to wire that interpretation of this person is different from me. So it's something that unconscious biases a lot of times are even things that we grow up with in our childhood. They're formed from religious beliefs, from environment, from your background, from, you know, stuff like that. And another thing is, before we're able to overcome biases, generally as a whole, as a society, and that's tough because a lot of people are thinking, oh no, you know, there's a self-righteous thing going on and saying, no, I'm very adaptable and all of that. So if we're going to overcome our biases, first we must admit that we have biases, or we have unconscious biases, because the more we convince ourselves that we are not biased, the greater our blind spot to recognizing areas where we are unconsciously biased. We must be able to identify or accept that we are biased in one way or the other. And we must be willing to identify and recognize this truth and the areas in which we are biased. And another thing is, we must be willing to interrupt bias in others. Now, this is probably the more difficult or the most uncomfortable part of breaking biases or interrupting biases. But I assure you, it is very helpful in the long run. Because by checkmating a friend, a colleague, a family member of their unconscious biases, realizing that they are not even aware of these biases, we're able to better put a stop to unconscious biases, because as we said, these people are not even aware. It's a blind spot for them. They do not know that they're doing this. Now, the method or the hours with which you address a bias with a loved one or a friend or somebody you know, well, that is, you know, that is the tricky part, and we're not going to go into that today. But I mean, wisdom is profitable to direct, reasonable. You have to do it. You have to try to be as discreet as possible. If you're trying to check another person on a bias, you do not want to do it in a public space. You want to catch them one-on-one and say, hey, you might not be aware of this, but, you know, when you say this, it makes this other person or this group of people feel, you know, because these things cut across every sector, in our work life, in our religious, in our churches, in schools, in education. We've got to be so conscious of unconscious biases and the effect that they are having, the unwholesome effect that they are having on another person. So anyways, that being said, here are 5 steps that we can do to start to overcome our biases. First check, or the first tip on how to overcome your bias is, so number 1 is practice mindfulness. What does this mean? We need to heighten our awareness. We need to be more aware, or have a heightened awareness of what our thoughts are about people. And also we want to ask ourselves, what are these thoughts based off of? What are they rooted in? So that we can check it before, it develops. From a thought becomes an idea. From an idea, do you understand what I mean? So you want to catch your thoughts. You want to be mindful. You want to heighten your mindfulness. That's the first thing we can do in this process of breaking the bias. Number 2 is surround yourself with diversity. Surround yourself with people from different backgrounds, different cultures, in different social situations, because you need to remember, as we earlier said, that unconscious biases are birthed from us surrounding things from childhood, where we're surrounded with our people who are alike with us, and our head is telling us that person is different, and that can be interpreted in your brain to mean anything. It can even mean that that person is a threat. So you now want to immerse yourself in an environment that is inclusive, different ethnicities, different color. You do not see, at this point, you want to try to deliberately not see differences between you and another person. You want to immerse yourself in cultural differences, immerse yourself with people from different races, people with different sexual orientations. And bottom line, you want to mix it up, just mix it up. Yes, so that's number 2. You want to mix it up. And that takes us to number 3. Number 3 is mastering self-awareness. You want to be slower with speech. You want to be slower with your actions. You don't want to just think it and do it. Self-awareness. So basically, when you're slower, you can take better stock of your actions, of your words, and you want to process things that you're doing and saying and all that kind of stuff. So practice mindfulness. And number 4 tip of how to overcome biases would be being specific in your intent to overcome bias. Let it be a bit more than a thought. Let it be a bit more than a word. Okay, you know what I'm going to now. You want to put action to it. You want to be specific. You want to put timelines. So basically, as opposed to I want to start mixing with people. Okay, that's a thought. Those are words. You want to consciously do that. You want to make new friends that are diverse. Anyways, the bottom line is you want to put actions, specific and intentional, whatever actions you want to take to overcome your unconscious biases. And lastly, you want to test yourself, what your blind spots are. You want to test to identify what your unconscious biases are, so that you can put in the work with the earlier steps identified. A problem identified is half solved, but a problem not identified is really not solved. It comes back to the problem of unconscious biases. So those are the 5 steps, listing a few that we can start to put into place or implement so that we can break the bias. Drawing this to an end, to buttress the fact how we all have biases. It's ironic how the people who are victim of biases develop a bias of their own, sometimes to the people who have victimized them, discriminated against them. So it's really just, if we don't intercept it, if we don't stop it, it rotates, it goes round. It's such a deadly, harmful thing to our society, to diversity, to ethnicity, to inclusion. We must stop it. We must put something in place now. Today, you and I must identify what our unconscious biases are, and we need to start to put in the work, because we're all victims in our own ways. Even the person who feels is maybe a white supremacist or whatever, the people who are biased against you because of your actions, so everybody becomes a victim if we don't nip it in the bud. Or even people who have gender biases, you have daughters, it comes round. We must put a stop to this. We must put our hands together to break the bias. So that's it for today. I hope we all put our right foot forward in identifying our biases, in accepting that we have biases, in working towards becoming better people as a whole, really. It's a function of do not give what you can't take. We don't want people to bias against us or have biases against us, or our loved ones or our families or people that we love. And we must return the same courtesy, Anyway, so if you have not subscribed, I don't even understand how that's possible. Please subscribe, like this video, and till next time, I remain your reinventing buddy. Bye for now.